On behalf of D.S. Kothari Center for Science, Ethics and Education, I welcome you all to the International Conference on Science, Ethics and Education, Transformative Pedagogies. We are extremely fortunate to have His Holiness Dalai Lama amidst us for this very engaging dialogue on some of the most central questions that matter to human beings. I request Professor Meenakshi Thapan to introduce the seminar to you.
Yeah, just put.
What does he want?
Then I
would like to ask opinion. Better to wait or start? Start. Oh, okay. Then it seems that those people who want to start, they raise hand. Okay, let's go ahead now.
Like this?
Yes.
Okay. So we at the D.S. Kothari Center for Science, Ethics and Education, which is a center located in the University of Delhi, welcome you all. And I welcome His Holiness especially and all the speakers who have come here from different parts of the world to take part in this really, what I think is a historic conference in this university. Before I begin, first of all, I would like to acknowledge and remember Professor D.S. Kothari, a professor of physics at this university until 1971. This is there for you. Until 1971, when he retired after a very long and distinguished career. Apart from other important positions such as scientific advisor in the Ministry of Defense, chairman of the University Grants Commission, he also headed the very influential Kothari Commission on secondary school education that actually changed the face of school education in this country. And my reference to his life and work is located in his inspiring words for a university, which he said must dare to take on challenges, new ideas, radical perspectives, to build a culture of learning that focuses on new thoughts. And to quote him, he said, where there is freedom to inquire boldly and readiness to doubt courageously. Those were Professor Kothari's words about the university. It is in this spirit that we at the Kothari Center bring to you this international conference at the initiative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who in seeking to go beyond religion, which is the title of his new book, has been wanting to establish a relationship between science, scientific research that seeks to develop an understanding of the connections in an interdisciplinary framework between science, ethics, and education. As scholars in India, those of us who work on the field of education, we are trained to understand schooling processes, for example, from very different viewpoints. These include, for example, a concern with why all our children are not in school, why do they drop out of school after a certain age, how can we keep them there, what are the difficulties associated with the education of girl children in particular, and problems of exclusion on the basis of caste, gender, and religion. These are very significant issues, undoubtedly, in a very complex and diverse society like India. It is urgent, however, to my mind, to understand also that teacher training needs to encompass much more than the development of a mere unidimensional efficiency of skills, but also to cultivate deeper aspects of self-inquiry, empathy, insights into transformative capacities of thinking in new ways, and so on. We are also trained to examine quality in education, and we pay special attention in this country to textbooks. And every few years, depending on which political party is in power, we rewrite our textbooks, sometimes improving the content, but often without providing training to teachers who are to use these textbooks in very different parts of the country. My main concern, however, is with an aspect of educational practice which we tend to erase, and we do not openly discuss it. This is for fear for being seen as propagating religious education of one kind or another. So here I am referring to the So here, page 2, here I am referring to, there is a fear of being seen as propagating religious education of one kind or another. I am referring to the fear amongst educators to talk about moral values in school education. This fear is partly a result of such education being associated with particular religions that are seen as framing moral science or moral values grounded on one or another religious discourse. The fear is based on the understanding that religion must not enter the sphere of education, which must be kept free from religious content. We are not proposing the inclusion of religion in education today, but we are only emphasizing the need to move beyond convention dualities of religion and its other, namely rational secular thought. In fact, breaking the boundary, such a boundary, by developing a form of secular ethics, as you yourself have been asserting, must be one of the gifts of education, to bring secular ethics onto the discourse. And in education since the 1970s, emerging from one of the most influential educators in the world, a Brazilian called Paulo Freire, there has been an effort to develop a kind of critical consciousness among youth, to question, to critique, to doubt, and also to understand the conditions that oppress them in this very unequal world. This is necessary, no doubt, but to my mind, it is equally necessary to develop a humanity in the real sense of the term by paying close and sustained attention to developing an ethics of care, empathy, and affection. This conference makes an effort to do just that in an interdisciplinary kind of perspective. So while we may say that science assists us in unraveling some of the claims made so far by religion, this should set us thinking not only about scientific research findings in this context, but also on the limitations of the oppositions between science and religion. At the same time, we need to focus on the way forward. We have the scientific research findings, which many of our colleagues will present to us today and tomorrow. We need to also have policy initiatives. We also need to rewrite curricula and train teachers so as to pose a critical question for this conference. How do we go ahead in building the next generation of our children and youth into a more humane and just society? As I have already said, it is His Holiness the Dalai Lama who conceived of the idea and theme for this conference and emphasized that it must be held in this university. I thank him for his remarkable vision and initiative and his consistent prodding about implementing secular ethics into school curricula. I must also thank our Vice Chancellor, who will be here very shortly, for his support in hosting this historic conference in this university, and welcome you all to 2 days of very rich and exciting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Meenakshi Thapan, for delineating the intent of the conference. We now begin with the first session for today. This session will have Professor Gananath Obesekere and Dr. Oh, yeah, sorry. His Holiness is invited to say a few words, please. Deliver the inaugural address. Sorry.
In the center.
And elder brothers and sisters, and particularly those professors. So now this time, the Delhi University is organized at this meeting. And also some Mongolian scientists. And also I think the Mongolian side, you see, helped, support this meeting. So, I think some of you already know over almost 30 years. We quite often, you see, meeting with scientists. Then I think majority of the people, you see, maybe you see this kind of meeting, I think first time. Everybody knows science is I feel, one sort of important method to know the reality. The knowing reality is very important. Unless you know the reality fully, our approach, no matter how sincere motivation and very wonderful goal, our method will not be realistic method. Our method become unrealistic. Any unrealistic method fail to get, the object which you want. Like that. So, I think human brain, something very wonderful. Vice Chancellor? Who is that? Oh. Welcome. Sorry, we start. Although we wait. And then finally we decided now we will carry. We will start. So, I think this human brain, wonderful. But sometimes our wonderful brain, sophisticated brain, sometimes creates more confusion. I think animal, they mainly use sensorial level of mind or consciousness, experience. So I think less danger, confusion. We, with this marvelous brain and a lot of thought, a lot of vision, and then sometimes creates a lot of confusion. So research, what's the reality, is very, very essential. I think you mentioned religion, generally speaking, very much emphasis faith. Faith, I think, should not consider some kind of obstacle for fully utilize our brain. Even as a very scientific-minded person, faith, you see, can help. So, I think the previous Pope, I usually call German Pope, each individual's name is sometimes very difficult to remember. And this is a name here sometimes is difficult to pronounce. so I usually used to call my first meeting with Pope, this Italian Pope, then Polish Pope, then German Pope, now today Argentinian Pope. I usually say, then I remember easily. So the German Pope, he mentioned faith and reason should go together. So in a way, that sort of hints, right? Reason means research. So faith and kind of research, analyze things, is not necessarily kasachuti, contradiction. But then, individual case, some people, just faith, and not much showing interest about using our analytical faculty. So in any way, science, very important. Since me personally, since childhood, this is some interest about anything. When I saw one flower, different color, different shape, how it happened, how it grow. Bird, insect come. Again, it's a curiosity. What is their origin, like that? And then mechanical things. How it moves. Quite often, when I was young, some people said, give me give some toys. Some toys actually is moving. And in previously, is it the dimijati?
Keys, using keys.
What the Bluetooth? Or that one. Huh? Then later, with some battery. So when I received that kind of toy, few moments I used that. Then out of my curiosity, dismantle, open. Oh, how it work? So I must tell you, once dismantle, then try to reassemble. Occasionally successful, most cases failure. So then that toy just no longer working like that. So then last 30 years, serious discussion with scientists. Very, very interesting. Then I think here I may say something about the Buddhist way of thinking. Although I never propagate Buddhism, I very much emphasis, and the rest of my life I fully committed promotion of religious harmony. So we need mutual respect. So one side try to propagate one's own faith, then sooner or later some sort of a conflict is start. So sometimes I telling some of my Christian friends, I really admire the Christian brothers, sisters. They really made tremendous contribution to humanity regarding education, health. I think all over the world, Christian brothers, sisters really made immense contribution. I think the greatest contribution, I think carried by Christian brothers, sisters. But at the same time, you see, they also carry some missionary work, conversion. That's not nice. Those areas where no sort of rich tradition, then okay. But a place where you see some kind of the rich tradition there, then there is a danger, conflict. So it is better to keep one's own tradition. So when I give some lecture on Buddhism in the West, I always emphasize they have their own traditional religious faith. That's mainly Judeo-Christian tradition, and mainly Christian, and some extent Muslim. Then of course Judaism. So I always is telling them, it is better to keep your own religion. So I never try to sort of promote or propagate Buddhism. Now here, I want to tell you, Buddhism, within Buddhism, there are different school of thought. In Nalanda, in Nalanda, I think eventually all four different school of thought, you see, Kasota, not only established, but also Kasota not only existed, but also I think further developed. Firstly, Takshashila, maybe, then Nalanda, then Brikamalashila. These mainly Sanskrit tradition. So like out of 4 different schools of thought, Rinpoche, Sotantik. You see, they more or less relying on Buddha's quotation. Chitta mantra, Madhyamika, mainly as a use investigation. So, I'm quite hot now here. Senchik to get senchunchi. One smaller one. Sorry. Oh, sorry. So, I don't know, like, what's the Afghanistan's something like this. Now remain like this, I think better. So then these 2 schools of thought, you see, they relying Buddha's own advice. O my follower, monks, scholars should not accept my teaching out of faith, out of devotion, but rather thorough investigation. So many Nalanda masters, when they investigate and a certain Buddhist teaching, they find go against the reasons, then they reject. Although this is taught by Buddha, but something different purpose. So we should not literally, we should not accept that. Like the Kazadi, the Dodu Kongri,
Sandi Nimochana Sutra.
Getches.
Sandi Nimochana Sutra.
Very important text. Out of 3 wheels, Dharma wheel, this belongs 3rd. And Chitta Mantra is considered this is top most important text. And now today, in Chinese tradition, that in Korea as well, in Japan, I think Vietnam also maybe. So you see, consider this text is a very, very important sort of text. Then Nagarjuna, and one of main his, the follower, the Chandakirti, you see, he mentioned 10 Buddhist sort of teaching, 10 Buddhist text, 10 texts, Buddhist sort of teaching. He mentioned we cannot accept literally. So this important book, one of them. So this shows, you see, the emphasis, reason is more important than the person who gives her taught. Then many great masters of Nalanda tradition, like Pavatri Kasa.
Arya Vimukti Sena.
You see, he, one of the students of Basuband. But when he writing one commentary about what's it? I think Abhisamaya Alangara. You see, he, with respect, reject his teacher's sort of explanation. So these shows, you see, the Nalanda tradition, you see, we emphasize reasons. Then finally, so the test or experiment is key factor to confirm this is right. So then, because you see, I want to tell you, because 40 years ago, when I, you see, seriously thinking or discuss with scientists, I just expressed, you see, that desire to one American lady who married with one Tibetan. She also, you see, become a follower of Tibetan Buddhism. So I told her, you see, my desire for serious discussion with modern scientists. And then she responded to me, "Oh, be careful, this is dangerous. These Western scientists are a very dangerous person." So you see, she told me, science is a killer of religion. Then I reflect, Buddha's quotation. You should not accept my teaching out of faith, out of devotion, but rather thorough investigation and experiment. So no contradiction. So then I start meeting with scientists and serious discussion, mainly 4 fields: cosmology, neurobiology, then physics. And later, you see, we have very interesting discussion about quantum physics. That's actually very similar to Nagarjuna's philosophical view. Very similar. And then also, some extent, I think some similarity about Chittamantra's viewpoint also. So very, very interesting. Then psychology. So 4 fields. So after 30 years of discussion with scientists, mainly these 4 fields, it became very clear. Immense sort of mutual learning, mutual benefit. So now I think we fully convinced at the beginning some abbots, scholars, in one big Tibetan monastic institution, they a little bit skeptical. Some even, you see, stress a young Tibetan student should not learn English. But then gradually, you see, these, I must say, some kind of little bit of orthodox way of thinking. Right. Now these also, now very much appreciate dialogue with moderns because of the science story. Like that. So finally, we, also they formally decided, now in our curriculum, the Buddhist study, you see, should include science. And also the final examination also should include the science.
Science, no.
So as I mentioned earlier, the mutual sort of enriching mutual benefit. To us, the knowledge about matters and cosmology, these things. Although we also have some explanation, but compare modern scientists, modern science, these are quite backward. So, very helpful to us, learn from latest scientific finding in these fields. Then to them, the Buddhist knowledge, Buddhist psychology, knowledge about psychology, about mind, about emotion, immense help to scientists. So many scientists now showing keen interest to learn more the Buddhist psychology. Right. Sometimes I publicly express, compare, modern knowledge about emotion, compare ancient Indian sort of knowledge, and including Buddhist knowledge about emotion. The Western psychology looks like a kindergarten level. Ancient Indian psychology, highly developed. So it is very, very helpful. Now, that's now academic level. Modern science, I think till late 20th century, much sort of knowledge or concentrate about matters which you can make because of measurement and calculate like that. Regarding mind is concerned, some scientists simply denying existence of mind, something because of that. Different. Something sort of different than brain cell. So mind is just movement of brain. Brain function stop, no longer mind or consciousness. So now later, I think you know already, through some sort of training of mind or some simple meditation, they actually affect our brain. So beside the brain, there is some third factor which affects our brain. And then, of course, the cases, those people who, after their physical, death, still body remain fresh. So scientists, no sort of answer how it happened. Then we make distinction. Grosser level of consciousness, subtle level of consciousness, very subtle level of consciousness. Very subtle level is more or less independent from brain. That's also seed of consciousness. So only that explanation
can explain.
Can explain. Otherwise, we can't explain that. So that simply expand the scientific knowledge already.
No.
Scientific knowledge. We also, find immense sort of benefit, valuable information about cosmology or all these the subatomic, these things. Really wonderful. So one casualty of our contact or learning modern
Science.
astronomy. Astronomy, all these things. The casualty is the Mount Meru. Some time back, I met one sort of some professors or some monks from Korea. We just say talk. And then I mentioned, do you believe existence of Mount Meru and world flat and the sun and the moon go like that? They say yes. Then do you also know through education, you know, world, just one, round, blue planet and round, and moon also go this, and sun very, very far. Big differences of the size. The Abhidhammakosha Karika, the almost same size, sun and moon. So then they say, yes, they also believe that. Then do you find some difficulties? They say yes. Then I told them, I consider myself as a Buddhist, but no longer believe Mount Meru. So we have sort of right, you see, sort of to accept reality which we find thorough investigation. So we should accept the scientific way of explanation, not Abhidhamma mentioned. Then they say, oh, now, wonderful. They are very happy. Otherwise, they have some confusion. So still some Tibetan scholars, old scholars, you see, when I ask, do you find some uncomfortable, there's no longer Mount Meru, they say, yes, a little bit uncomfortable. I think yesterday also I mentioned, when a spacecraft landed on moon, some picture actually, you see, happened. So some picture I show some scholars, Tibetan Buddhist scholar. Still they refuse. Oh, might be the spacecraft landed on some part of
Mount Meru.
Mount Meru. So sometimes it's a century-old thinking. Even some evidence, sometimes a little difficult. But then time passes. These things, the reality, much more stronger than just a belief, like that. So in any way, that's one part. The purpose of our meeting is simply expand the field of modern science. Now not only matters, but also consciousness and the way to perceive things.
No.
I think ancient Indian sort of knowledge,
No. There is great detailed explanation of how our mind, cognition engages with the objects. So there is also in the epistemological text distinction between conceptual thought and perception, direct perception. And then also there is a distinction between the mental consciousness and sensory consciousness.
Any Tommy Yula Jusu, Druin Jupas, Tobati, Seven Jupas, that didn't.
And so within this explanation, there is also explanation about how the sensory perceptions engage with the objects as the objects themselves kind of present to the consciousness. Whereas there's also distinction between how there's explanation about how it's different from how the conceptual thought engages with objects through the application of what is known as the principle of elimination.
So last year I participated in World Hindu Conference. I think from many countries, the representative of Hindus you see, together. So there also I mentioned the ancient, the Indian sort of, the brain really investigate all these different fields. So, irrespective of what belief, Buddhist or non-Buddhist, so they judging these, the text, when we read these texts, there are a lot of debate with Buddhist scholars and non-Buddhist scholars. So I think the development of Buddhist scholar in Nalanda institution, because there are tremendous sort of knowledgeable scholars in non-Buddhist
Traditions.
non-Buddhist. So I think mutual benefit, logically, there is challenge, then further develop. No challenge, no further develop. I think evolution,
Darwin's theory of evolution.
Evolution. You see, some challenge, and further develop, further develop. So therefore, I express that. So ancient time, wonderful sort of scholars. So it is important pay more interest, serious effort to study, to learn. I mentioned that. It's just to carry some rituals and some color put here is not sufficient. We must study, analyze. I mentioned that. The ancient times, the non-Buddhist sort of knowledge, also equally wonderful. Now these must sort of revive it. I mentioned that. So this is one thing. Now, the second purpose, as you mentioned, I fully committed about secular ethics. Why? Many problems which we are facing, it's actually related with our brain, our heart. So faith brings warm-heartedness. But then sometimes brain more powerful than heart. So then, in spite we all human beings have sort of same potential of warm-heartedness because we born from our mother, and everybody received maximum affection from one's own parent and particularly mother. So even animals, birds also, they have that experience. So any sentient being who received maximum affection from their mother, they also have the seed of affection to show other. So all 7 billion human beings have the same sort of potential. That I believe. And then some scientists, you see, recently, you see, some occasion, the scientists, you see, they carry a sort of experiment. Very, very young children, 2-year, 3-year-old, infants are infant, show sort of what's it? Cartoon, right?
No.
Cartoon
Some kind of, call it?
some picture.
No.
I think some drawing where you see young children play together and helping each other. Another little sort of negative attitude each other and create some obstacle each other. So such young infant people or children, when they saw the harmony helping each other, they smile, happy. Because harm each other. Children, you see, showing dislike. So they say basic human nature is more gentleness, more compassionate. Then more important sort of factor is more compassionate heart there. The physical condition much healthier. Constant anger, fear. Actually, some scientists say eating our immune system. So this physical, you see, grown up with some other sort of affection, therefore, that experience really absorbed in our blood. So person who have more warm-heartedness, his or her, you see, much happier, much pleasant. Even economically poor, still feel happy. Without these inner value, even very rich, very powerful, deep inside, anxiety, too much stress, too much worry, fear. So these people have this problem of lonely feeling. So they rely on drugs or alcohol, like that. So you see some religious people. One time I met in Spain one Catholic monk. He spent 5 years in the mountain hermit life. Very little hot meal. Then when I met him, I was told, the organizer, that one monk who spent 5 years in hermit life is one to see me. So when I met, I asked him, I heard that, so 5 years you remain in the mountain. What kind of practice? Then simple answer, meditate on compassion, love. When he mentioned that, his eye, something very special significance. So his life looks very simple. So no modern facility. But, you see, because he practiced inner value, person find most happier, because of the happiest of the
Happiness.
the happier period, like that. So therefore, now, that is now not come from religious faith, but biologically, you see, developed that way. Because of that, religion of human being all stress the importance of love. Because that really help us. So you see, further sort of strengthening that, you see, create the concept of God, creator. The creator himself, you see, infinite love. So that tremendous sort of effective, single-pointed faith towards creator, of such sort of nature, infinite love. Everybody, you see, created by such one. So we believe we all have the seed of love, or some kind of sort of sparks of God, since we created by God. So really, very powerful, wonderful. But then non-theistic religion. I mean, I know here, you see, all major religious tradition, you see, carry same message of love, and same practice. As a protector of practice of love, they all also teach tolerance, forgiveness, and self-discipline, and contentment. So that's the religious side, all, you see, all, you see, same message, same potential. And then, today, out of 7 billion over 1 billion non-believer. And now what to do? These non-believer. In order to educate them, you should be more compassionate person. Relying on religious faith, then they say, oh, I have no interest. Then, no method. So now here, India's tradition, secularism, respect all religions and also respect non-believer. It's wonderful. When India's constitution is created, the constitution is very much based on secularism, because India is a multi-religious sort of nation. Then, at that time, I don't know, the non-believer quite significant or not, I don't know. But in any way, non-believers also there. So therefore, now there is no other choice how to educate these non-believers. Only way is secular way. So now the real sort of, so the reasons to use in secular approach. Firstly, our common experience, as I mentioned earlier, we all come from our mother. And then some scientist, one of my great friend, Bob Livingston, you know, now he no longer on this earth. So he sort of told us, our meeting, after birth, next few weeks, the mother's physical touch, the child, is very, very essential to properly develop the brain. And he used the word enlarging their brain. So that's, and then I think each one, when you spend with someone who you have trust and loving kindness there, that moment, are you happier? Or when you spend with some people, you distrust, and always danger to exploit each other. Then that occasion, I think spend even a few minutes, you feel uncomfortable. People to whom you have full trust, and mutual respect, and hours, you feel, even without food, you feel very happy. Isn't it? Even animal, although they have no language, I think we can ask the birds or these things, other animals like dogs or cats, when their companion peaceful, licking each other, much happier. Or then also you see, the scientists tested, experimented. Two mice, both wounded. I think scientists, actually create some wounds, I think. For experiment, I think. So you see, one mice with wound remain alone. Another mice who have that wound with another mice. Then the mice with a companion, the companion licking. So the recovering. The mice which received licking is much, much faster. So animal also, the same experience, although they have not much of sophisticated brain like that. So therefore, firstly, our common experience, and secondly, the common sense as I briefly mentioned. We will develop conviction. Warm-heartedness is key factor for happy life, peaceful mind, through that way, healthy body. Then third, scientific finding, as I mentioned earlier. As a scientist, many of my sort of friends, scientists, actually non-believer. They only believe reason and experiment. So through experiment, then you see some scientists now really, they believe or accept the warm-heartedness is key factor for a healthy body, happy person, happy family. So I think to non-believer, if we use common experience, common sense, and a scientific finding, then we can bring conviction or awareness about these inner value to those non-believer. So now here, that's another sort of purpose of my sort of meeting with scientists, like that. So now here, one famous university in Delhi, of India, all this knowledge, over 1,000 years, you Indian already have this knowledge. If may I say so, the modern Indian, a little bit of neglect about these things. You're too much busy to copy Western modern civilization. So I think now I really extremely happy. Now some people in this country now really showing interest about these things. See, I really feel very, very happy. So these simply your own ancient knowledge. Now we're simply reviving these things, not something because of the new inventions or like that. The moral ethics, secular ethics. Now secular ethics can fit in secular education field, as you mentioned. The ethics based on religion, then like India, different religion, then difficult. What religion? Or theistic religion or non-theistic religion. Within theistic religion, there are differences. Within non-theistic religion, also there's differences. So there's no other choice except secular way. In the West, some my friend, some Christian, some Muslim, you see, they have some, reservation, the very word of secular. So they consider secular is something disrespect religion. And some even says atheism and secularism is some sort of connection. According to Indian understanding, it is totally wrong. Secular means completely neutral and respect all religions. So therefore, I think India, through your own 1,000-year-old tradition, I think can make certain contribution on this planet of 7 billion human beings. So a lot of problem which we are facing is actually our own creation. Obviously, war, human-made. So ancient time maybe for survival. But now, I have too much greed and anger, hatred, suspicion. These are causing all these things. So all this violence is man-made problem. So therefore, we have to think 7 billion human beings on this earth, how to build happier humanity. And this 21st century, it is our common responsibility to create this 21st century should be century of peace, century of non-violence, finally, ultimately, century of compassion. That's our common responsibility. So, therefore, you see, everybody have the responsibility to make some contribution how to build this 21st century, century of compassion, century of peace. The only way, in the terms of humanity, only way is secular way. So, religious temple, not important. Important is education, sort of institution. From kindergarten up to university level, this is some education about modern ethics, strictly based on a secular way. I think that's the only hope. If you, education institution, do not take interest in these things, then I think our world, not much hope. If education institution take care from kindergarten up to highest level of education, we should pay more attention about this value. Then, later part of this 21st century can be, I think, more peaceful world. I will not see. Within the next 20 years, will not achieve. So then, after 20 years, I will leave another planet. So these young people, I usually see telling the generation of 21st century and the generation of 20th century, me belongs to generation of 20th century, and these professors, you also, you see, belongs to 21st century, 20th century. So we go together some other places. So these, the generation of 21st century, now you have to sit, you have to live on this planet, isn't it? So it is your sort of interest, your responsibility. Sometimes I jokingly say telling, that after 20, 30 years, I may not be here. Even in hell, I may get some permission, at least 1 week, 2 weeks visit to world from hell. Then I will watch you, this generation of 21st century, whether you really building happy world or not. If you, that generation also, you see, carry the similar way, fighting, killing, bully, like that, then I will report the head of the hell. Oh, please extend your hell. There are a lot of people now ready to come here. Thank you.
Much gratitude to His Holiness for inaugurating the conference with his enlightening thoughts and insights. Thank you, His Holiness. We have amidst us Pro Vice Chancellor, Delhi University, Professor Sudhish Pachauri. I request him to deliver the welcome note for the conference.
This.
महामहिम दलाई लामा जी और मंच पर विराजमान विद्वान और आप सब, मैं कान पकड़ कर माफ़ी चाहता हूँ कि मैं कुछ देर से आया। आदरणीय वाइस चांसलर महोदय को आना था, वे अचानक एक बहुत ज़रूरी काम से बाहर चले गए और उन्होंने ये काम मेरे सुपुर्द किया, तो मैं आपके सामने हाजिर हूँ। महामहिम को सुनना एक अपने इस दुनिया के सबसे मोहब्बत करने वाले आदमी को सुनना है। दलाई लामा साहब को मैंने जब भी सुना, ये शायद चौथी बार सुना है, वो जो बातें कहते हैं वो सीधे यहाँ आती हैं, यहाँ से होती हुई दिल में समा जाती हैं और हर बार हमें लगता है कि ये दुनिया कुछ बेहतर होगी, जो है उससे बेहतर होगी, क्योंकि दलाई लामा हमारे बीच हैं। ये कोई मामूली बात नहीं। जो उन्होंने कहा वो सारी वो बातें हैं जो बुद्धिज्म में और जो उन्होंने अपनी जिंदगी से ग्रहण की है। बहुत मोटी सी बात, हमारी शिक्षा में यह है कि ऐसे कॉलेजेस भी हैं जो एसी हैं और ऐसे कॉलेजेस भी हैं जो खंडहर हैं। अच्छे टीचर भी हैं, माफ़ कीजिएगा जो अच्छे नहीं हैं वो भी हैं, मगर एक चीज़ की कमी है कि हम जो पढ़ने वाला है उसके दिल से बात नहीं कर पाते। उसको डिग्री अच्छी दे सकते हैं, वो बहुत अच्छा इंजीनियर बन सकता है, वो बड़ा अच्छा डॉक्टर बन सकता है, वो कुछ भी बन सकता है, मगर इंसान बनाना हम भूल गए हैं। हम आदमी बनाना भूल गए हैं, क्योंकि जो दिमाग है वो उड़ रहा है और जो दिल है वो सिकुड़ रहा है। दिल बहुत छोटा हो गया है, बड़े दिल वाला आदमी दिखता नहीं, कलेजे से लगाने वाला दिखता नहीं। जो बात कही कि एक माँ जो बच्चे को जन्म देती है, अगर बच्चा उसके कलेजे से न लगे तो उसके मस्तिष्क का विकास मुश्किल हो जाता है। बड़ी बात कही है ये, छोटी बात नहीं है, बहुत ही बड़ी बात है। मैं तो जानता नहीं, बच्चा जरा सा बड़ा होता है तो बाहर के देशों में उसे अलग कमरा दे दिया जाता है, और हिंदुस्तान में बच्चा माँ के ठीक पास चिपक के सोता है। ये बच्चा इमोशनली स्ट्रांग हो सकता है मगर वंचित है, और वो बच्चा इमोशनली कमजोर है मगर दूर रहता है। कौन सा ठीक है? श्री कृष्ण जब पैदा हुए तो उनके बचपन के बारे में एक कवि हैं हिंदी के, आपको कुछ मालूम होगा, सूरदास। ये मेडिएवल पोइट्री के पोइट हैं, कृष्ण भक्त हैं। यशोदा के घर में कृष्ण है, यशोदा का बेटा नहीं है, वह देवकी का बेटा है और रातों रात लाया गया है। अब यहां यशोदा जब उसे अपने कंठ से लगाती है, गले से लगाती है, तो उसका वर्णन जैसे करता है, मां को भी बहुत कुछ मिलता है, बच्चे को ही नहीं मिलता है, मां को भी मिलता है। ये जो संबंध है ये दलाई लामा ने यहां टच किया। मैं हिंदी का हूं और हिंदी वाले दिल से सोचते हैं, बाकी के लोग किससे सोचते हैं मुझे नहीं मालूम, लेकिन हम दिल से सोचते हैं। और उस नजर से ये बात मुझे छू गई। इसीलिए जो माएँ अपने बच्चों को जन्म दे करके चली जाती हैं, मर जाती हैं, उनके बच्चे किस हालत में होते होंगे हम नहीं जानते। और जो बच्चे अपनी माँ से दूर रहते हैं उनकी तलखियों के बारे में, अकेलेपन के बारे में नहीं जानते। दुनिया भर की बड़ी बड़ी बातें करते हैं, पेडागोजी की बात करते हैं, इथिक्स की बात, मामूली सी इथिक्स है, कंपैशन, जो बात बार बार कही, करुणा, जो कमजोर है उसकी रक्षा। बुद्ध का दर्शन क्या है? रक्षा। गांधी का दर्शन क्या है? रक्षा। किसकी? जो कमजोर है उसे कोई नहीं बचाएगा। इस सर्वाइवल ऑफ द फिटेस्ट में कोई नहीं बचाने वाला उसे, उसकी रक्षा। ये कंपैशन गायब है। इसीलिए कलह है, घृणा है, विद्वेष है, कंपटीशन है, हत्या है। हम हिंदी फिल्में देखते रहते हैं, एक भी फिल्म में न तो नायिका रोती है न नायक रोता है। इतनी खुशी है कि न नायक रोता है न नायिका रोती है। पुरानी फिल्में देखिए, नायिका रोती है तो आप भी रोने लगते हैं। ये कैथारसिस ही खत्म हो गई आर्ट में, लिटरेचर में। ये कैथारसिस खत्म हो गई। लगातार झगड़ा है। दलाई लामा के होने से हमें भरोसा होता है कि वे जब भी आएंगे हम एक जगह बनाएंगे जो पवित्र होगी, जहाँ असहस्तित्व होगा, कोएग्जिस्टेंस होगा, हम प्यार से रह सकेंगे, परस्पर सम्मान की बात कर सकेंगे, म्यूचुअल रिस्पेक्ट कर सकेंगे। बात तो उसके बाद शुरू होती है। एक दूसरे को घूरते हुए, गुर्राते हुए कोई बातचीत नहीं होती। बैठ कर के बातचीत होती है, आंखों से बातचीत होती है। और जो उन्होंने कहा उसको मैं, अल्लामा इकबाल जो उर्दू के बहुत बड़े शायर हुए हैं, उनका एक शेर मुझे बार बार याद आता है। उन्होंने कहा था, अक्ल और दिल, इसके बारे में कहा था। उन्होंने कहा था, बेहतर है दिल के पास रहे पासबाने अक्ल। कि जो अक्ल का पासबान है, अक्ल का जो मालिक है, वो दिल के पास रहना चाहिए। जो अक्लमंद है उसे दिल के पास रहना चाहिए। बेहतर है दिल के पास रहे पासबाने अक्ल, लेकिन कभी कभी उसे तन्हा भी छोड़ दे। कभी कभी अकेला भी छोड़ दो भाई दिल को। हर वक्त क्यों सवार रहते हो? पुराने लोग जो दिल से बातें करते थे वे क्या बुरे थे? जानवर दिल से बात करता है, इतना निरीह होता है कि आप उसकी जान ले लीजिए, जहर खिला दीजिए, वो आप पर भरोसा कर रहा है। ये जो बातें हैं, ये हमारे, हम सबके परम पुरुष, इस युग के दुनिया के संत, शायद सबसे बड़े संत दलाई लामा जी से हमें मिलती हैं। अगर हम इनका 1% भी इस्तेमाल कर सकें, 1% भी इस्तेमाल कर सकें, तो ये दुनिया बेहतर हो जाएगी। इन्हीं शब्दों के साथ मैं आपके सेमिनार का, मैं समझता हूँ बेहतरी का या और अच्छे निष्कर्षों तक पहुँचे, इन सारी शुभकामनाओं के साथ स्वागत करता हूँ और अपनी देरी के लिए फिर माफ़ी चाहता हूँ। धन्यवाद।
I'll just try a quick translation for what he said in Hindi. He began his address by saying, His Holiness Dalai Lama, I apologize profusely for being late. Our Vice Chancellor could not come because of some issues, so he handed over the responsibility of addressing the conference to me. He continues, to listen to His Holiness is to listen to the most endearing person on this earth. His words go straight to heart. Each time we are around him, we know that the world will become a better place with him being around. Then he talks about there being all kinds of people in this world. So there are good teachers and there are not so good teachers also. But one thing what we are lacking as educationists is that we are not able to connect with our students through our hearts. We have forgotten to create human beings because the minds are flying high and the hearts are shrinking. So that's why there's a great lacune that is very frightening. He further mentions the importance of motherly love, and he says that it's a big thing to acknowledge. I mean, it is a thing that has to be acknowledged, but it often goes unacknowledged. Then he mentions Lord Sri Krishna, where he's supposed to have two mothers, one who gave birth to him and the other one who brought him up. And Professor Pachauri says that not just the mother gives love to the child, but also the child is a source of great love to the mother. And then he goes on to say that the literary people are actually are the people who think from their heart. And then he goes on to further say that we don't know what do the children who don't get maternal love go through. We never realize what they miss out on, and no one can really understand what happens. Then he further says that Buddha's vision was primarily about protection, protecting and caring for the weak. And we have too much chaos, hatred around us nowadays. We have become less empathetic. And the presence of His Holiness Dalai Lama assures us that there will always be a space for coexistence, love, and mutual respect with him around. And then he quotes Urdu poet. I'm poor at translating this. I'll just try to convey the idea. Iqbal's quote, Iqbal's sher, where he says that the intelligent ones should stay close to the mind, but leave it alone once in a while, that is, come closer to heart. And he ends the address by saying that His Holiness is the biggest saint around, and if we could learn even an iota from what he says, it will make the world a better place. Thank you. We now commence with our first session for the day. This session will have Professor Gananath Obesekre and Dr. Radhika Herzberger sharing their thoughts and insights on the idea of consciousness. This session will be moderated over by Professor Meenakshi Thapan. And before we begin, I have to make a few announcements that we will have question-answer session after each session. And there's a request that please keep your questions short and keep them directed to the issue being discussed in the specific section only, That's all. Thank you so much.
Now what do I do with this?
First session, Professor Gananath Obesekre, as many of you probably know, is Professor Emeritus from the University of Princeton in the United States, where he taught until 2000. He retired then, and he has continued to work and is very prolific in his writing. His most recent book is entitled The Awakened Ones, and I think he has drawn from that and perhaps some other work in his address to us today. He has also taught at Harvard University and at New York and Columbia Universities as well. We are very privileged and honored to have him here amongst us this morning. Thank you, Professor Obesekre.
Thank you, Meenakshi. What do I do with this? I'm not used to gadgets. I can sit here? I'll stand. When I get tired, I'll sit. Yeah, can I sit there? Yeah. I have half an hour, is it? Just give me a warning, huh? Dear friends, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here on this occasion and to have the Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama here, and also the Vice Chancellor of the university and my good friend. Okay, I'm a congenital academic, and generally I have to have a paper with me and be able to read it, you see. But I have been warned not to do it, so I am going to talk off the cuff and informally. They can hear me, can you? Okay. Now, the way I want to start this is very simple. I was born and raised in the Theravada Buddhist tradition. Unfortunately, the Theravada Buddhist tradition has been recently somewhat hostile, not immediately, to Mahayana and Vajrayana, which is a pity because I think these three traditions are not all that disparate. Indeed, they are all united in the word of the Buddha. The problem that I am going to raise is simply this. I was nurtured and brought up in a Buddhist tradition, an intellectual tradition, where we were taught Buddhism in highly abstract terms. Conditioned genesis, of which His Holiness has written, the no-self, the aggregates, all were presented to us in highly abstract form. And there's nothing wrong with that, because I am also given to abstraction, too many abstractions as a matter of fact. So the question is, however, this. The teachings of the Buddha was not presented entirely in this abstract form, but was presented in the form of dialogues. These dialogues were enshrined in arguments, in storytelling, and a lot of debates and so forth were enshrined in the Buddhist dialogues. So something I'm trying to suggest that we have missed something if we look at the text in abstract form and neglect the dialogical storytelling elements in the Buddhist tradition. So one of the things that struck me was that this is not only true of Buddhism, but it is also true of, let us say, Plato. Plato has been presented sort of as a kind of abstract thinker when we read Platonic dialogues, that they are presented in the same way, in a similar way as the Buddhist dialogues. They are full of stories, they are full of discussions. So I am suggesting that we must be able to restore the storytelling dimension of the Buddhist tradition. And I know that in these storytelling traditions, the Buddha himself had a good sense of humor. So did our friend here, you see. He has a wonderful sense of humor. And so there are a lot of things in the Buddhist tradition that we must resurrect, so to speak. Now, when I was a young man, I used to go in my, wandering around doing anthropology. And one of the things that struck me as a youth when I was in the late 20s and early 30s, we could still go to pilgrimage centers, you see. And in these pilgrimage centers, the people gathered together, and what did they tell? What did they do? They tell stories. Stories, you see. And the stories come from a long tradition of Buddhist vernacular texts, not so much Pali texts, but vernacular texts which ordinary people then are quite fully aware of. So storytelling, as well as what I call the obligatory pilgrimage, an institution that has lasted a long time, from the Buddha's own time, and formalized in the reign of Asoka, you see, was intrinsic to this tradition. So, given the fact of storytelling, I will start with a story. If I can have some water. Yeah. The story that I am going to tell you is from a 13th century Sinhalese Buddhist text called Saddharma Ratnavaliya, which could be translated as ornaments of the pure doctrine. It is a series of stories, and the story that I am going to tell you is this. That is a village story about village people in the 13th century, but it is also relevant to us. It starts with a statement from the Dhammapada, which says, "From not by hatred." This religious instruction was given by our teacher when he was in residence at Jetavana with reference to a certain barren woman. What's this story? It is about two people. It is about a husband who had lost his father and had to do work himself, and the mother says, "You got to find another wife." So after some time, he agrees, and a wife was brought to him, and he married her, but unfortunately, she was barren. And then the mother said, "Look, this woman is barren, and if you want to produce children who will look after you, then you will have to have another wife." So they got another wife for this woman, and when she was getting pregnant, the other wife, the barren wife, inserted poisons into her. You see, this happens 3 times. In Buddhist texts, the number 3 is very important. Everything happens 3 times or 7 times. So she inserted poison into her, the first round and the second round, and in the third round, the child got lodged into her womb, and both the mother and the child died. And before the mother died, she had an act of vengeance. The act of vengeance said, "When at some future birth I will be born as a demoness, and I will eat your children in the same way that you ate mine." That's the first theme of vengeance. And of course, there's a theme of dissimulation, pretense, you see, because the barren wife pretended to love the woman when she did really hate her. So this went on in the next generation. In the next generation, wronged woman was born as a cat, and the other woman was born as a hen, and the same repetition, what Freud called repetition compulsion, occurred, you see, and you had the same routine reflected. In the third, then when the hen was eaten by the cat, the hen made a vow that I'll also do the same thing with you, and in the next birth, one was born as a tigress and the other was born as a deer, and you had the same repetition. And in the final birth, or as a result of good karma, one of the women had, was born in Sravasti, you see, in a wealthy family, whereas the other woman was born as a demoness. And what happened was this. The demoness consumed the first child and the second child, and when the third child was born, the mother decided, I will go and stay with my parents because I have all the support with my parents. And so she gave birth to the child, you see, because the child had good karma. Birth to the child, and she was coming with the child, and then she saw the demoness, you see. So she ran into the Jetavana monastery where the Buddha was and lay the child at the foot of the Buddha. The demoness could not enter because she was afraid, but Ananda, the Buddha's disciple, Buddha said, send the demons into my monastery. And then the Buddha gave a sermon on dissimulation, on revenge, and then in a very interesting passage, reference, the Buddha told the wronged woman, give the child to the demoness to hold. She was afraid. I can't do that. No, do you know that I have quelled Angulimala, the brigand who cut human fingers? I have tamed him, and he is now an arahat. Why are you afraid? Give the child to the demoness. So the woman reluctantly gave the child to the demoness, and what happened? The demoness started crying, you see. What is happening is depressed, repressed emotions re-entered into the picture. And we know, of course, if we work out the plus and the minus of the text, that the demoness was really the original good woman, you see, the original good woman. So what is happening here? We know from clinical evidence in psychoanalysis, for example, that when someone is attached to a symptom, to a symptom, when you get rid of the symptom, you cry sometimes because the symptom has all sorts of secondary compensations. So let us now review this text again. What you have here is, when you look at the text, you are not sure who is the original person, who is the good one, who is the bad one. So what you have in this text is a blurring of the distinctions that we have in our normal lives. We have good versus bad, good versus evil, malevolence versus good, you see. And these binary distinctions that we make in everyday life is sort of evened out in the Buddhist text. And I think this is not at all unusual. Many of the Buddhist texts does that. So what you really then have is, you question what a major figure like Claude Lévi-Strauss, who rather was very much interested in the reification of these binary oppositions, whereas the Buddhist text blurs them. We are not sure which is right, which is wrong, and indeed, we are all capable of right and wrong, good and bad. That's the point of the tale. Now let's continue this whole tale, if I can recall my text, which is very unlikely. Yeah. Oh dear, she has given me 5 minutes. Doomed. Well, then what I'm going to just sum it up, you see, sum it up. I'm going to briefly mention then two very, very crucial texts in Buddhism. One is the text of Angulimala, who had the brigand who had garlands of fingers, and what happened is that the Buddha was aware of this person, and the flow of his compassion, the flow of the Buddha's compassion was such that this brigand was tamed, and not only tamed, that the benedictory verses that are sung by pregnant women even today is about Angulimala, the person. And the point about the Angulimala text is that he's stricken with guilt, you see. He's stricken with guilt. He's stricken with remorse. So he punishes his body with what the Buddhists call dhutangas, extreme ascetic practices. not sleeping, lying in the open, living in the cemetery. And I am saying that not sleeping is one of the features because as a result of his guilt and his remorse, Angulimala, Shakespeare's Macbeth, has murdered sleep, you see. So it's the last person that I'm going to give me another 5 minutes. The last person that I'm going to talk is Ajatasattu, you see, who killed his father and also, you see, was stricken by guilt, remorse, and so forth. And he again goes to the Buddha because he wants to absolve himself from the crime of murder, of his parricide murder. And the Buddha's compassion flows into him. And this person who could not sleep, the person who had murdered sleep, now could sleep. But there's a catch. He cannot escape from the karmic consequences of having murdered his father. But what is interesting is, though this is an extreme instance of violence, what my friend Nietzsche calls resentment, extreme malevolence, like Richard III, you see, extreme malevolence, or Iago, you see. Even he, he has to pay off his karma through several hells, and ultimately, even he will be born as Bodhisattva called Vijitasena. Now, what the last point, if she will give me another few minutes, is this. Now, we are using words like remorse, guilt, conscience, that is the way our ethics are internalized in our minds, that is what I call conscience, redemption, and all that. That comes from the Western tradition. Now, I am suggesting that though those terms come from the Western tradition, if you look at the story of these demoness, if you look at the story of Ajatasattu, if you look at the story of Angulimala, they are dealing with guilt, remorse, redemption, you see, forgiveness, and so forth. So what I'm suggesting is the ideas from the Western tradition are not so alien to the Buddhist tradition the moment you look at storytelling, you see. The moment you look at storytelling, then the Buddhists and the Christians can be, in a sense, brothers and sisters to each other, you see. And to do this, I'm suggesting further that we need not look at identity in meaning. We should not be seduced by dictionaries, you see. We should be following one of my favorite thinkers, Wittgenstein. We should be thinking of family resemblances. There are family resemblances between the traditions of Buddhism and Christianity, so much so when I read Corinthians 13, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not love, and become a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. That is about karuna and maitreya and so forth. And with that, I'm going to stop my discourse. Yeah. You'll have to.
Dr. Oh, yes. Me too, some difficulties now, this mission. Yes, at the last, your word, Harva, last word, you see, it's very true. All major religious tradition, the actual practice is practice of love. Like Muslim, Islam. Sometimes people get some wrong impression. But actually, Islam, some my friend, Muslim, you see, they say the genuine Muslim practitioner should extend their love towards entire creature of Allah. Then the very meaning of jihad is combat your own destructive emotions, such as anger. So, all major religious tradition is the same practice. So you mentioned these things. I fully support and very much agreement, or I should appreciate. Then I must say, in a philosophical field, there's big differences. But you see, same purpose, I feel, for Christian practitioner or theistic religious practitioner, the concept of God, creator, that sort of philosophical views use strengthening their belief, the value of love. And then non-theistic, law of causality, then that philosophical views, you see, use for, again, it is strengthening of conviction about the value of compassion. So, different philosophical views, or different way of approach, but the same goal, try to become a sensible human being, compassionate human being. So then, once we realize all different philosophical views is simply different way of approach, the same goal. So then, among humanity, there are so many different, even Buddha's own time, among his followers, there are different sort of mental disposition. Therefore, Buddha is taught, as I mentioned earlier, Chitta Mantra philosophical views has come from Buddha. The Madhyamika philosophical views also come from Buddha. So, Buddha accept the different mental disposition, so he taught accordingly. So that we can learn. Yes, now humanity, at least I think around 6 billion believers, we need different way of approach. To some people, the theistic religion is most effective. To some people, non-theistic way of approach is most effective. So, up to individual. So, we understand that, then we can develop mutual respect. So, then you mentioned at the beginning, Theravada, Mahayana, Tantrayana. That I think it may need little corrections, but I do not go detail.
We just heard Professor Obasekere on his presentation about the significance of storytelling and how that was connected to certain philosophical and ethical ideals that were present in the everyday life of Buddhists. And how at present there is a need to restore this form of communication, which is no longer there because of the upsurge and interest in other ways of presenting Buddhism. And Professor Obasekere mentioned how it has become increasingly abstract, and abstraction is not easily communicable. So if there are any questions from the audience, we have a few minutes for any questions that anybody would like to raise. Yes. Yes. You will need to come. Is there a hand mic? Can you give it to me? Yeah, somebody will have to go and give it to me.
Hello.
From the audience.
Hello.
Give it to me. You can.
Professor Gandhinath, I have 3 questions for you. The first, and I think indirectly, my third question is in a way addressed to, if I may, addressed to His Holiness also. And the first question is, do you really believe that instruction by storytelling will ever die? Or will it only take other forms? There was a suggestion in your presentation that this was dying out in Sri Lanka. Now, I may briefly say that my children knew more about the myths and legends of the Hindu tradition than I did, because by my time, storytellers were dying out. But by the time of the children, it may sound comic to say so, but comics were taking over. And they were much better informed about the myths and legends as children than I was, because storytelling had been taken over into visual representation. And I don't have to tell you, we have so many other people who have explained that when, with the rise of science, the hold of mythology was getting weakened, it was then in Europe that the writing of novels emerged to take over the narrative function from the myth, and Western classical music emerged to take over the function of overcoming time, which must be a question which would interest His Holiness. My second question, very briefly, is...
Excuse me, can I ask answer the first one?
One question.
Because, look, when you come to the second, I would have forgotten the first, you see. You're quite right. Now, unfortunately, my presentation here had to be severely elided. I totally agree that the storytelling tradition has died out, and one of my favorite thinkers, Walter Benjamin, has a thing called the storyteller, when he pointed out exactly what Loki here is trying to do, trying to tell us. Now, one of the questions that were asked by me, by one, a student was, can we believe these stories that are coming out? The Buddha was born as a crow, a monkey, a dog. Can we believe that? Then I pointed out there has to be a kind of willing suspension of disbelief, you see, for this thing to work. For example, what the Buddhist texts are trying to tell us is that all human beings, dogs, crows, and cows, and all of us, including so-called noble creatures like lions and elephants, belong to the same cosmic order. You see, that is a sense of the Buddhist text. When the Buddha is born as a crow or some animal like that, it is something that we should be proud about and not dismissive, because it is what I point out. Had Darwin been a Buddhist, he would have loved it, but unfortunately he wasn't a Buddhist, you see. So the second issue that I want to raise, I'm glad you raised it, is that I admit that the storytelling tradition has not entirely died out, you see. They don't have those nice stories that you are talking about, but unfortunately, much of these stories have gone into the official syllabus of the Department of Education in Colombo. Horror, you see. That's a horror, because those fellows, the way they pick the stories and the way there's no elucidation of the stories. So what I suggest is that these stories should be looked at for their symbolic truth. Like the story of the goddess, the demoness Kali, we should look at it as a symbolic truth, as a discourse on the inability to make categorical distinctions between right, wrong, good or bad, evil empire and the good empire. Those are meaningless. That's what the text tells us. So we have to reconstruct, not deconstruct, reconstruct these texts in a way that makes it intelligible to other people. I'm suggesting we should take a tip from Rudolf Bultmann, the Protestant theologian, who used the term demythologization. We should demythologize these texts to produce their rich symbolic content. That's what I have. First question.
Very quickly, Professor Balchek. Very briefly, my second question would be, I had a feeling this morning that the mind-heart dichotomy was being somewhat overstressed. That, take leave of the mind, which can be a source of confusion, and find your redemption in the heart. And this mind-heart dichotomy, you were talking about dualities in your own presentation, good and bad. Now, is there an essential reason why this cannot be overcome by rational thought?
Loki, can you, I missed that, so something's wrong. Can you tell me what I...
The mind-heart difference, or the duality, which is the heart is being emphasized over the mind. Do you think rational thought can overcome this difference between the mind and the heart?
Well, that's a tough question. I think our Holiness here will be able to better answer it than me. But since you asked the question, I'll respond to it. Why should the mind and the heart be separate? You see, they are integral to the whole thing. And the heart without a mind, or a mind without a heart, is, so to speak, empty. So in that sense, what I'm saying is that I am, of course, as you well know in my recent book, I am a strong critic of rationality, you see. That is not reason in the Buddhist sense, but I am a strong critique of Cartesian rationality, which posits, I think I am, you see. I think, so in that sense, as you well know, my writing on the visionary experience, is a critique of that form of rationality, because there are modes of thinking which bypass the Cartesian cogito, you see. And Buddhism is full of such ideas, and so is forms of Christianity, you see. Christian mysticism is also very close to it. So in my current writing, what I'm trying to do is to, following my idea that these two traditions, in spite of deep epistemological differences, have unifying qualities about them. So in my book, I talk, in The Awakened Ones, my most recent book, what I'm trying to say is that I try to show the kind of thinking that you get in Buddhist texts are also found in people like William Blake, you see, Carl Jung. Freud, you are not, unfortunately, not all that much of a Buddhist in his theoretical statements, but Freud had a beautiful statement where he says human beings are caught in a double dilemma, one with eros and the other with thanatos. Thanatos is what Buddhists call impermanence. Impermanence, thanatos. And the point that Freud tries to make is we can't live on the basis of eros, because as thanatos is always with us, death, dying, impermanence is part of our species being, you see. I don't know whether that answers your question, but I hope people will read my unreadable book.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Yes? Would you like to take the mic? And yes.
A little unholy question. It looks like most of our religious discourses get hijacked by this idea of sameness of religious goal, in the sense that all the religions are about achieving similar kind of goal. Is this not another historical construct, this sameness of religious goal? Is it not another historical construct to which we are mindlessly subscribing to? Number two, I mean, in other words, it is another kind of fetish which has to be unraveled. And why do we fear, if there is different kind of religious goals, why do we have to fear those different kind of goals? What could be the possible reasons why most of our religious discourses operate with this presumed fear of different kind of religious goals? Thank you.
Given my age, 85, and the fact that I had to use these gadgets to hear, my amanuensis here will have to tell me what it's about.
The question is actually addressed to, I think, both of you, that why do we always make similar, all different religions? So that becomes another fetish, saying that all religions are the same or are speaking the same thing. And why can't we allow different religions or look at each religion having different goals? That they are not necessarily saying the same thing. They could be different. So why are we always trying to cover?
Ooh, I never said that. His Holiness will have to answer that, because I am not saying that.
नेक्स्ट वो मैडम के लिए आपको लैपटॉप वगैरह लगाना होगा, तो थोड़ा उठा के टेबल पे कौन रखेगा? अभी नहीं, अभी रुक जाओ, जब मैं उनका अनाउंस करूँगी.
I think one of Nagarjuna's writing, Shimunamda Nala, and 차 탐자는 나와서 제야 말이지. 차 그시 나와 뒤니 다네 이제 뺄 거야 요 말도 차 탐자는 나와 제야 말이지.
Yes. In this text by Master Nagarjuna, grinding or pulverizing the grains. He says that when we give examples or use analogies and so forth, you cannot use those examples, analogies, thinking that you are actually trying to generalize completely. There's nothing which is, everything is dissimilar. Even if you use some example, it's not saying that it's 100% same as what you are talking about.
So, among different religious traditions, one part, there are similarities. So it is better to look that aspect. If small differences, then like Shia and Sunni, fighting, killing each other. What use that? Then I'm Buddhist. You see, theistic religion, you say, oh, wrong view, what use? Follower of theistic religion, the non-theistic is nihilism. It's both sides. It's just some sort of reasons. Similarities, view, some reasons. Or entirely different thing, there are also some reasons. Then up to us. What better to choose? Big differences and remain distance. Then that further increase the concept of we and they. That's the basis of violence. Then we can't say 7 billion human beings are same. You can't say. Even size of nose, 7 billion differences.
Yeah.
So little difference is always there. And generally, 7 billion human beings are same human being. All want a happy life. Do not want suffering. So it's better how to build harmony, how to build mutual respect. I prefer that much better. Like that.
Since the question was also directed to me, I just got to say something. And I, for one thing, pointed out, made the statement, in spite of serious or deep epistemological differences. That's the point. There are epistemological, philosophical differences. Precisely because of that, we must search for areas in which we can talk to each other. And this is especially relevant for the world in which we live in, you see. So that is not to deny such things, but to search for resemblances so that we can live together as a human community.
That's very true. That's practical. You see, if we too much emphasis differences, then I think the follower of theistic, they believe that's only truth, only religion. Non-theistic religion, then worthy to eliminate. So, and then I think no matter how strong theistic religious sort of believer, you can't eliminate non-theistic religious believer. I think combined Muslim, Christian, about 2 billion. Is a follower of theistic religion, and then Jews, and some Hindus. But still, very difficult to eliminate non-theistic religious believer, Jains, then Buddhist. Perhaps, I think now nearly a billion population. So, difficult to eliminate. And similarly, non-theistic religious people united and try to eliminate theistic religious believer, impossible. So there's no other choice. Whether we like it or not, we have to live together on this planet. And religion should be something positive effect to humanity, not division, not divide and fight. Really. We must think seriously how to prevent a conflict in the name of religion. Terrible. That's my view.
I am very happy to welcome and introduce Dr. Radhika Herzberger, who will be speaking to us about ways of thinking, Indian philosophical debate on transforming consciousness. Dr. Herzberger is director of the Rishi Valley Education Center, which is located in rural Andhra Pradesh. It's an educational complex. And she is really working both on the design of the school and the curriculum of the school to promote the values which are embedded in the teachings of J. Krishnamurti, who is the school's founder. She has been there for the last 30 years.
Oh, you can see that.
And she has received her bachelor degree in philosophy, Sanskrit from Elphinstone College and PhD from the University of Toronto. Her book, which is the Bhartrahari and the Buddhists, an essay in the development of 5th and 6th century Indian thought, was published in 1986, and she has other publications, including school curricula, textbooks, which they use at their school, to her credit. And she was most recently awarded the Padma Shri, a national award by the Government of India in 2013. Dr. Herzberger.
Well, I am indeed very honored to have been invited to this conference over which His Holiness the Dalai Lama is presiding. And I hope what I have to say will appeal to the interest that has brought many of you here, which is the need for transforming the way we think and the way we look at the world today. Because such an opportunity is very important given the way we are today and the way the planet is. And it seems to me that we are heading for disaster. Now, I come from a school that J. Krishnamurti, a philosopher, whose life spanned most of the 20th century, established several years ago. I've been at the school for 30 years. Before that, I studied Buddhist thought. And not very much of it. I don't know. I know very little. But I know some of the thinkers from about the time of the present century to the 5th and 6th century. I've studied some intensely. And I have also done what His Holiness mentioned this morning, that is, look at the dialogue between non-Buddhist thinkers, Sanskrit thinkers, and the Buddhist philosophers, Dignaga mainly, whose works are not available in Sanskrit but have been restored by a great many people, some from Japan and some Jain, a very great scholar who was a Jain. So it is important for me to hark back, given that I am here, to some aspects of Buddhist thought. Now, these are the questions that Krishnamurti asked in the course of his 50-year career, if one can call it that, of talking. And what place has knowledge in the transformation of man and society? He used those I won't go into that right now, but he asked that question. And by knowledge, he didn't mean what we call knowledge, but we will talk about that as I talk. The second question he asked was, is compassion knowledge? Is compassion the cultivation of thought? Now, what he meant by thought is also something that we will try to explain. Yes. Knowledge will not open the doors so that you are free of envy. This is the third proposition I would like to discuss. And I would like to talk about it in the context of neuroscience. And may I also say that by envy, he included all the negative emotions of which His Holiness mentioned this morning, hatred, anger, cruelty, all those. So envy is a shorthand term for this, what we might call base emotions. Now, the first question, has knowledge a place in the transformation of man, is an old question. It goes back to the beginning of our common era. And I would like to look at it in the context, in the framework of what I consider to be presuppositions of Indian thought at that period. Ignorance binds, and you can read that, ignorance binds human lives in samsara. And freedom comes into being when the forces that spin the wheel of samsara lose their force. Now, one of the early philosophers, and I'm not sure whether he preceded Nagarjuna or came after Nagarjuna, but he's Akshapada Gautama, and he forms the basis of a rationalist school of thought called Nyaya. And even the rationalist, shares this idea of samsara, that is, human lives bound in wheels, ever-recurring wheel of life, birth and rebirth, death and rebirth. And in order to identify the forces that tie us to the wheel, he mentions birth, character faults, false belief, action. And action means tangled action, and misery, dukkha. And he says he identified some kind of knowledge, pramana, means perception, inference, analogical thinking, and testimony, reliable testimony, that if you know these, the cycle ceases. So he was a rationalist. And to Krishnamurti's original question, does knowledge have a role in the transformation of man? Akshapada Gautama would have said, yes, definitely. Now, there's another assumption he had, that elements in the cycle are causally connected and form an ordered set. So they form a certain order: cause, effect, effect, cause, in a kind of cyclical pattern. The cessation of any one leads to the cessation of its predecessor by iteration, by continuous statement. When each one in turn ceases, that is, through knowledge of sorrow, rebirth, character false action, freedom comes into being. So freedom comes into being. It's a rationalist thinker, but freedom comes into being. It's not a goal to be chased. It comes into being when you look at your character defects, for instance. When you know, not look into, but know, through these perception analogy. Now, samsara can be pictorially represented as a wheel. That is force, the forces that we mentioned drive it in a certain way. And moksha or release is backward spin. So this is something that is shared widely in that era. Now, I'd like to draw a little bit of comparison. Socrates believed that knowledge is virtue. That if you know something, the virtues, goodness, then you acted well. Knowledge of the good leads to virtuous action. Gautama held, this is Akshapada Gautama, that knowledge is liberating. Knowledge of hindrances to the good leads to freedom from what prevents the good into coming into being. Knowledge of hindrances. So you see, this is an assumption that is shared. Nagarjuna said knowledge is not liberating. Nagarjuna's, sir, I speak with trepidation here. Nagarjuna's critique of the Nyaya theory of knowledge put to rest Gautama's ingenious way of linking knowledge with freedom. So hereafter, the Nyaya Sutra changes completely. Though it reads as a whole, you can see the goals of Vatsyayana, the commentator, are no longer moksha or liberation, but they become success in the world. That is wealth, artha, success in the world, artha and dharma and duty. Moksha and kama are excluded. So it changes direction. The whole text changes direction after this. So in fact, Nagarjuna's critique of Akshapada Gautama enters the fabric of the Nyaya text. You can see Nagarjuna in Vigraha Vyavartani uses the example of fire. And he uses, in the Nyaya text, the fire, which we'll go to the next one, Nagarjuna asks, other pramanas, like fire, which illumines both itself and the object, are they self-justifying? Because in perception you can make mistakes. So how is that possible? Or are they like standards of weight, themselves need of calibration? So the question arises, who is the Father and who is the Son? So it's a circular definition. That's what Nagarjuna's critique. And it enters, you can see it in the second chapter of the Nyaya Sutra. All these are in there. So now I'm going to skip 2,000 years, more than 2,500 years. And going back, raising that question that Krishnamurti raised, is knowledge means of transforming the mind, the consciousness. And we have to understand that Krishnamurti did not mean by knowledge in the ordinary sense of the word, where knowledge ultimately through evidence is connected with truth. He acknowledged that that was the case, but he wasn't much interested in it. He called it technical knowledge and said, yes, of course, you need it. What he was interested in was knowledge that has the following form. My son has failed his examination. Now, that sentence has a penumbra of feeling around it. What is this penumbra of feeling? Disappointment, bitterness, anger, etc. It's true. The sentence is true, but it has a penumbra of feeling around it. Another example for it may be, I am a Hindu. Now, depending on where I say it, how I say it, it can also have a penumbra. It can have hatred in it, opposition. It may be just a statement of fact. So he was interested in sentences of that kind. And in that connection, I'd like to say what Damasio says. He says that the Western, the way it is, as I understand it, I am not in no position to speak in universal terms of Western thought, but as I understand it, the building blocks are ideas. This is Locke, Hume. They're ideas that are the building blocks of the mind. Now, Damasio seems to say that cognitive skills taught in school, reasoning, decision-making processes, are all, do not function as disembodied systems. And aspects of cognition we recruit, namely learning, memory. I think I forgot to put attention, he brings it here too. Are profoundly affected and subsumed within the process of emotion. That the thought feeling, Krishnamurti in his earlier years didn't say thought, he said thought feeling. It's a hyphenated statement. So I have a feeling, and later in his writing he cuts out feeling, but that doesn't mean that the connotation is also dismissed. So the unit of consciousness is thought feeling. So in school, here Damasio suggests that we have to rethink all this. And I think that is Indian thinking also, that thinking is not separate from feeling. But again, I'm tentative. Now what I'm sure about Krishnamurti, because I have read a lot. Knowledge is accumulated experience. He uses the term knowledge as accumulated experience. So sometimes he does say knowledge can allow the new to come into it, but he prefers perception, which he distinguishes from knowledge. It is nested in emotion. It is stored in memory. People respond according to that memory, to the challenge of the new. It is a response of the past, and it is mechanical. That's basically how he sums up our ordinary living. He's not summing up scientists or artists or something. Our ordinary daily life is of this nature. It is involved with experience, which is thick, stored in memory, thick with emotion. And so now, can you undo the mechanical? So you have this original question. Does knowledge have a place in the transformation of man? Can the mind, which has been put together through knowledge, undo what it has gathered? Can my mind empty itself? And in that very process of emptying itself, discover the action which is new. So here's a contrast between action which is new and the action which is the response of memory. When I say my son has failed, then I am responding from earlier stored experience and from what I have, all my so-called human emotions. Failure, the sense of failure, humiliation, bitterness, disappointment, the network of thought. So we go back to the building blocks of thought, and we go back to the building blocks of negative thought. That is, thought which is infused with hatred, envy, disappointment, sorrow, all that. So he takes the example of envy, but you can substitute any other feeling. And envy is not merely jealousy. So when you look at envy in yourself or anger in yourself, it's a cluster. It is not merely, when somebody says, what is envy, you give a dictionary definition, and you may give example. You feel because your neighbor is more beautiful than you are, or that he has a bigger house. That's only part of envy. Envy is the desire for more knowledge, more experience, more beauty, more riches, whatever. It is the sense of comparison which says, I am this and I must become that. So I think if you look more closely into how the self is born, you might say it is born at moments of this kind where you separate yourself from that event, the cluster of feelings that you have, and the thought cluster that is within it, with an ideal self. And you divide subject and object. So envy is the feeling of becoming virtuous, becoming noble, becoming a saint, achieving enlightenment. Attention. Then he goes to his favorite subject, which is attention, which is the door that can open out into whatever freedom from envy. Let's not call it enlightenment. Let's just call it freedom from envy. So he says, in the first two, sums up what has been said in the last section. But he says, what is the door? Attention. But my attention has to be vital as that feeling, that penumbra which is old. An attentive mind is an empty mind. So the key is opening the door is attention. Now, I come from a state which has had a lot of grandmasters at attention. I call them grandmasters because we have bestowed titles that Ashtavadhani, man with 8 attentions, Shatavadhani, 100 attentions. So it was like an acrobatic feat. People, remember, were asked questions and they could answer them. 10 questions at the same time, including lots of distractions, and they could answer all in meter. So avadhana that is attention, has a great deal, huge amount of work has been done. I think it's also in Indian thought, in Sanskrit thought, and it's also a grammatical category. We can go into that some other time, but here, an attentive mind, that was just an aside. An attentive mind is an empty mind. The marks of total attention. You can't see it? Something has to be changed. Should I pause? Should I pause? Okay, marks of attention. What is it? The vitality of attention should match the vitality of that feeling that you have when your son has failed the exam. What are the marks of a total attention? And he says, it's not exclusive. It's not focused attention. See, most of us in our school children say, pay attention. It's not like that. Concentration. It's not concentration. Then this is very crucial. It is awareness of the feeling without any recognition. And that is a subtle point, because if you recognize, if you give it a name, then you automatically either condemn it, it's a judgment, it's a condemnation. I must not feel that way. And you bring the past in. You divide the self from the nots, you divide self from its qualities. I am jealous already. Jealousy is an object and you are separate. It does not divide subject who is attending from the object being attended to. Like, I will not be envious. It empties the mind of all presuppositions. And it has the capacity of dispelling base emotions like fear and envy. And that is clothed in compassion, because there is some compassion in yourself when you say, well, this is the way it is. That's me. That's the way it is. In a school setting, how does this work in a school setting? Now I'm coming to my last 2 sides, because I have condensed Krishnamurti's teachings in all these slides. And it's a Krishnamurti school, and as I think Dr. Tho yesterday was saying, he has heard Krishnamurti and says, how can that be translated into the context of a school? That's your question. So, one is that it's a non-authoritarian relationship between teacher and student, because at the basic level, teachers and students suffer from envy, suffer from anger, suffer from feelings of competition. So if you acknowledge that, then they're both learners, and they're learning at the same time. And you encourage students and teachers to look at the beauty of the world, because we are in a valley which is quite beautiful. Point out the landscape. To observe the natural world with innocent eyes. But also the internal world, your own envy, your own with innocent eyes. By innocent eyes, I mean not naming, not responding from the past. And understand things as they are, sharply, without censorship or an overlay of emotional history. And this applies both to students and to teachers. Then, reward and punishment are not suitable tools of learning. And these are encouraged and discouraged. You can't do without punishment. There are incorrigible students, but they are discouraged. They're not tools, the main tools of learning, as they may be in some schools. You rank them, you give them lots of marks. And discipline is maintained through discussion and dialogue, through this encouragement to look within. While the teacher has to hold the child and give him a certain confidence that I am not different from you at a certain level. And what are the values we impart? A global outlook that is not chauvinist, not this is a Krishnamurti school, or this is an Indian school, or this is not a chauvinist identity. There is no teaching of identity, that you are this, you are such and such. Love of nature, and we've done a lot of work in this area, and concern for fellow human beings. And there are values worked into the culture of the whole school. Now, I'll explain why I say whole school. Because hitherto I've only talked about relationship and what some of the examinations, we don't have marks, we don't have exams, till the last years. But we also, when Krishnamurti's main advice was, don't be a community. Don't be a community. There is something very exclusive and aggressive about a community. And it makes sense because the school is located in one of the poorest areas of India. Our neighbors are shepherds and farmers. It's a valley, but the hills are all bald because they turned bald when railway lines were, in the 19th century, were laid. Railroad tracks had to be made out of wood, so the hills are bald. So this is the setting, and for us to have privileged children from all across India, fee-paying children, and to be a closed community would be completely irresponsible. So woven into the design of the school is the sense of responsibility towards the valley. So we have reforested quite a lot, and regeneration of the earth is central to our curriculum. So as you might say, it's environmentally focused. There's a kind of neutral way of putting it. It's environmentally focused. And so I'll stop here. We have a rural education program that has had quite a lot of success. We have a rural health clinic, etc. So I'll stop here. So,
thank you for that, Dr. Hertzberger. She took us through from the 2nd century philosophy to the 21st century through Krishnamurti and his philosophical thought and his thinking to contemporary everyday life of being in a school and the work that they are doing at the Rishi Valley Education Center. Are there any questions or clarifications that anybody would like to seek? It's open for discussion. Would Your Holiness like to say? Yes? The one, Ajay.
I have two clarifications. One is you said that thought feeling is the building block of consciousness. Could you really explain what this consciousness is as per J. Krishnamurti? And second is when you were talking about the attention,
Pardon? Can you say?
When you were talking about the attention, you said that attention is a recognition of feeling without recognition.
Yeah.
To me,
Yeah, it's a contradiction.
yes, it's a contradiction. It's almost like saying sun rays without sun. So I would like you to request to throw more light on that.
So shall I, since I remember, my memory is short, I remember the last one first, I'll answer that. Perhaps I should have clarified it then. And perhaps when I say what I have to say, I'll have explained your first, I'll have clarified something in your first question. Now, I think it's important to conduct a thought experiment, or perhaps not experiment, but use a word Professor here likes, phenomenology. That is to look, to observe what is going on in the mind when you have a negative feeling, like when you are, you have some bad news, so my son has failed. I like to use that. And you see there's a struggle. I don't know, you observe that struggle. And that struggle consists of a whole lot of talking to yourself. First of all, there are all kinds of sentences that emerge out of that feeling of disappointment or whatever it is. Now, you are conscious of all that. You name it, that he's not so bad, you justify it, you go back and forth, you condemn him, you justify him, you register all that. But can the mind then, instead of seeking a solution, see it as it is? The contradictions, the general attitude to your children, all your experience that has gone into that little drama that emerges it's a complex. And instead of going on, forgetting about it, or can it be dropped? And the dropping it, Krishnamurti said, how do you recognize it? What is recognition? You name it, and when you name it, that is recognition. But without naming it, it's an act. Perhaps it's a mystery how that act can come into being, but it is, you can just let go. One can use big words to describe that. Krishnamurti sometimes used the word insight. I don't want to go into the Sanskrit, but I don't, because I'm a little self-conscious. I feel I'm too audacious. It's maybe the word vajra, something that cuts across. I don't know whether I've answered your first question. If I haven't, perhaps you can ask it again. Yeah. It's I think it needs a phenomenon, I don't know how to pronounce it, phenomenological approach. And I would like to say one thing which I meant to say, but all right, let me listen to that question. Shall I say it? Well, yes, there is an essay by A.K. Ramanujan, who's a very well-known poet and essayist. It's a beautiful essay that asks the question, is there an Indian way of thinking? And at school, we've been looking at it. Is there an Indian way of thinking? And I think I would like to ask the audience, and also perhaps some people who know Western philosophy well, whether this epistemology of reversing this kind of cyclical nature of the mind. You don't have to agree with rebirth. You can all think of this kind of drama that goes in when you are frustrated. The spinning of the mind as that and whether there is an equivalent, epistemological equivalent to this, that if you can stop the cycle from spinning by reversing it. I'm not sure. But that I would consider an Indian way of thinking. Ramanujan doesn't mention it. He mentions some other things, which, if you're interested, I can talk about.
Yeah.
Thank you. This question is specifically for Madam. You said knowledge transforms consciousness.
That, yes.
And my question is consciousness then blank? But to carry on with the question, can there be a compassion without love? Because we've been using word since the morning, love, consciousness. And how is consciousness related to love? And a very selfish question rather to His Holiness. My ancestral mother is actually a Khampa, and my ancestral father is a Nepali. I'm a born Hindu, but I practice Buddhism. This is very selfish in the sense that, of course, we all need a guru, but is it very important to follow the specific order to be a Buddhist? Thank you, Your Holiness.
That His Holiness will answer that question first. But the question, when you say knowledge is transformative, that was the position of Akshapada Gautama, who was the rationalist. And Nagarjuna's critique put his vision to an end in the Nyaya Sutra. But it may survive in modern times, maybe in psychiatry, or I don't know. But I'm not sure whether knowledge, rationality, maybe rationality can address problems of psychological illness or whatever. But there is this view of Damas, the neuroscientist, that feeling is attached to cognition. And in the case of feelings like envy, you have to separate out. How do you separate out the feeling component from the cognitive component? Now, the rest of the question is addressed to His Holiness.
So in order to make answer, firstly, I should have clear sort of knowledge about question. I still do not know what is the real question. That's correct. Question correct. I think as far as Buddhism is concerned, as I mentioned this morning, in Pali tradition, I think not much sort of the clear sort of there. Not much make differences. But then Sanskrit tradition, and particularly Nalanda masters, then as I mentioned earlier, so 4 different schools of thought. Then each have subdivisions. We Tibetan study all these different philosophical views. So it is very, very helpful to understand each one's, what's their basics of reasons. And then similarly, I think Arya Deva's 400 verses also, you see, explain, I think, all existing different philosophical views at that time. And then a lot of debate. Then Vabhavika, he was a very detailed explanation at that time, the philosophical views. So therefore, now we should include the different sort of philosophical views about Christian, Islam, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, all these should include. So then one's own practice, then up to individual.
Yeah.
But as far as knowledge is concerned, we have to study all these different philosophical views. Then you get the fuller picture. Then you can follow or you can practice according to your own mental disposition. And one sort of say, one tradition. That's, I think, very, very healthy sort of approach. So then, in your presentation, you say, mentioning a lot of,
different views.
Distinction is a different thought. I think for, actually, in order to know that, the Arya Asanga's kasa,
Abhidhamma Samuchaya.
Abhidhamma Samuchaya. We study that. Then Abhidhamma Kosha Karika, wrote by Boswant. Then also Dharmakirti's Pramana Vatika Karika, the 3rd chapter out of 4 chapters.
Yes.
3rd chapter, very important to make distinction, the different sort of different levels of the Hasore, different way of function, the different mind, mainly sensorial level and mental level. Then Tantrayana make distinction, grosser level of mind, more subtle level, like dream state, sort of certain mind, or then the deep sleep, another level of consciousness. Then at the time of faint, another deeper level of consciousness. So we need more study. Then you also use the word of emptiness. Empty. The one word empty, a lot of different meaning. So you say, and then within you see this, I think both the ancient, the Indian tradition, Buddhist and non-Buddhist, using, you see, shunyata, empty, but different meaning. Within Buddhist, 4 different schools of thought use the same word, but different meaning. Then within Madhyamika, same word, but different meaning. So we need, sometimes just pick up that word, then you can't you can't get the precise understanding. We have to, the word empty comes, then we have to look the whole scripture. The whole scripture, takada shung kwa di sungdang de deni in empty kwa langor mado shung jijing kwa malimba empty chik
So when we come across a single word like emptiness in a certain text, we cannot just say that it means this, definitely, because we need to also see the context in which that word is used in the text as a whole.
Yes. I'm using the word as Krishnamurti used it. I'm not using it in reference to what I have studied, whatever little I've studied of the Buddhist past. And for Krishnamurti, emptiness is that the mind has no subject-object division. It has, and it leaves a space in the mind which is sort of permanent unless you neglect it badly, and in which then you have reached a deeper level of understanding where it can expand into larger and larger pools of silence. And so, not that you can't have negative thoughts, but they dissolve. Bhagavad Gita has that image of desire flowing into the minds of the realized being and flowing out. Samudramapa. Natu kama kam. There's that Sanskrit saying. Desire enters the mind of the enlightened man as the river enters into an ocean. That's the Bhagavad Gita. And I think in some sense is that it doesn't ruffle the mind. And I think that comes close to the way Krishnaji uses that word, empty.
Then your presentation, the last sort of the few sentences, a global outlook, love of nature, concern for fellow human beings. Oh, wonderful.
But these are written into the curriculum, so that when you form the curriculum, the textbooks, they are focused on the environment.
That's very good. So
any more questions?
You're dying to ask. Actually, we need to move to the next, but if it's very quick, very quick. Question, quick.
Yeah. So, you're going to ask the question, Rajan? Yeah.
Yeah, but more to His Holiness.
We are colleagues, and this is part of an internal debate that we have at school.
Radhika took a position in her paper that Nagarjuna doesn't see knowledge as transformative, and she based it on her analysis of the pramana. My own understanding of that particular thing is that Nagarjuna is trying to show that the pramanas don't have any intrinsic existence. They arise in mutual dependence on the prameyas. But that doesn't mean that Nagarjuna is saying that they can't function.
No.
So I would assert that for Nagarjuna, knowledge is transformative. And I just wanted to ask His Holiness if he would comment briefly on this.
Karsa. Did it? Go. Kanda, Ngobumawan Namji, then Samanamji rule Shashana, in Umurung Shashana Pejiri, the Kanda Kasurpugi, Yujin Namshati, Seme Pachik, the number 10, Chikdanapo. That some of the Kangatukrislam, Rangri to Yachi, Shame to 다 고물루 공부 뒤로 고물루 공부 쪼도 뒤로 차가 있는잖아요. 반전 나와 잡에 아니 샤자르드는 참말드는 샤자스티 송샤들이.
So basically what you were saying is true, that Master Nagarjuna actually does accept that the pramana and the prameya are mutually dependent. So there's nothing independently existing as such. Although the realists do kind of criticize the Madhyamakas, and also within the Madhyamakas there are the subdivisions, such as the Savatantrika Madhyamakas. They say that, of course, we can say objects do exist, because there is a pramana which actually perceives those objects. And then when they are asked, how do you actually justify now? So, of course, basically in the Buddhist philosophy, something that exists is defined on the ground that there is a valid cognition or knowledge that actually sees that thing, and therefore there is the thing does exist. And although this is the general kind of consensus among all the Buddhist philosophical schools, yet the realists say that, how do you actually confirm that a pramana actually is there? And then they say, because there is what is called a self-knowledge or self-knower, which actually sees that pramana. And because Master Nagarjuna's position is that things are interdependent, therefore Master Chandrakirti actually says that between the pramana and the prameya, they are also interrelated, interdependent.
So your point right. If you properly understand about that, then very good.